I grew up on an island in Alaska, and I lived on the same property since birth to high school graduation. Our house was 2 stories, and the downstairs had a bathroom, furnace room, storage room, entryway, and rec room. One of the walls had some plywood pieces up, so we could feed extension cords throughout it to our crawl space. We had a C-shaped driveway that you would enter from one side and then park in the carport, and then just drive forward to exit. The crawl space consisted of 2 big water tanks, because we caught our own rainwater. We also used this area for storage. The space was 10 by 15, but only 3 feet high. You had to lift the cover up to get into the water tanks. You could only enter the crawl space from the side of the house. It was a 2 by 2 door that we kept the master lock on, but never actually locked it. Our dog Brewster's area was on this side of the house as well. He had a big fenced area, his own stairway and porch, which was half covered, and he had a dog house. Brewster was a Weimaraner chocolate lab mix who weighed 130 pounds. He was a fantastic dog who only barked when necessary. During the summer, we had black bears in our yard most nights, and Brewster would give a quick bark to get them on their way. We knew his barks. There are 4 of us in my family: my parents, myself, and my older brother, who is 2 years older and has Down syndrome. My brother was in special education at school, and there were other kids who would come into the same room, but just once in a while throughout the day, because they had a smaller disability and were able to keep up in some of the general classes. But some of the kids had discipline problems or mental illness. My brother was loved by the kids in school, and everyone knew him. One day, a native kid that was about 15 came to our door and wanted to play with Travis. We thought it was odd because Travis was moderate Down syndrome, and he didn't really like playing with other kids. He liked watching kids play. Travis likes watching movies and listening to music. My mom asked the kid what his name was, and he said his name was Mark, and he knew Travis from junior high the year prior because he would go into Travis's class sometimes for help with his schoolwork. I remember him staring at me a little too much, and he didn't seem like someone who was mentally challenged. My mom let him come in, but kept a watchful eye on them. Travis seemed like he didn't want him there. My mom told Mark we were having dinner soon, and told him it was time for him to go. My mom found out he had moved into the area where we lived, but it was still a little ways away. He had been in and out of foster care most of his life. His parents were abusive addicts. I think he came over another time, and my mom felt bad for him, but she felt something was off. She felt like he was coming over because of me. My mom politely told him that Travis didn't really like having visitors, and he seemed okay with that and never came over again. My parents went to a church service on Wednesday evenings and would be gone a couple hours. I would stay home with Travis. At the time, I was 11 and he was 13. I started helping out in the church nursery when I was around 9, and when I turned 11, my best friends and I took a babysitting course, which included CPR and first aid. We would babysit together, and at age 12 started babysitting on our own. My mom was a homemaker and was always home except for Wednesday church service. My parents didn't drink, do drugs, or smoke. I can only remember my parents going out a few times where we needed a babysitter. I would leave the downstairs door unlocked for my parents when they were only going to be gone a couple hours. I was expecting them home in a half hour, and was surprised when I heard the downstairs door open, and I thought I must have not heard the car pull up, and Travis was up past his bedtime, so I quietly tell Travis to go to his bedroom and get into bed. I start walking through the kitchen to the top of the stairs, and I call out, "Mom? Dad?" And I hear the footsteps stop, and I'm looking down the stairs, and I can see men's work boots and jeans. This isn't my parents. The way the stairs were set up, you could only see the bottom half of someone without descending the stairs. I'm scared to death, and I run to Travis, who is going down the hall, and I grab him and drag him to my parents' bedroom because it is the only room that locks, has a phone, and rifles. Down syndrome kids are very stubborn, so my brother just wants to go to his room, but I get him to sit down on the bed. I'm trying to keep him in the room while I am grabbing a gun. I'm trying to call my neighbor. I can hear him walking around downstairs still. My neighbor answers her phone immediately, and I whisper that someone is in my house and that I'm scared. She told me to come out onto the front porch and she'd be there. I get the courage and run to the door and get outside. Thankfully, she is in our driveway and has her hound dog with her. She lets me know that she is going to enter the house through the downstairs. She disappears from sight, but comes back quickly and tells me that the door is locked, so she makes her way up the stairs. She gets to the top when we hear the downstairs door open and the crunching of gravel as the intruder is running off. She lets go of her dog's leash, and the dog chased the person into the woods. The dog came back 10 minutes later, and our neighbor sat with us until my parents got home. The police were never called because I think my parents assumed it was a neighbor boy screwing with me. We lived in a safe place where you just had to worry about bears and the occasional wolf. A week after this incident, our dog would bark 15 minutes after we went to bed. Every night, we would look out the windows and never saw anything. We figured it was bears because it was springtime, and Brewster was probably just getting used to them again. A couple months of the barking still happened. I had my best friend stay the night, and we would always stay in the downstairs so we could be louder and stay up as late as we'd like. Kate had a brother that was 7 years older, and we asked if he'd bring us some booze. I know we were young, but that was the normal thing for our town. Kids started drinking, smoking, and having sex in middle school because of boredom, I think. We got 13 feet of rain a year, so we would be inside a lot. It was a little after midnight, and our brother never showed up, and Brewster never barked that night either. We were just sitting on the stairs, braiding each other's hair, when we both got a feeling like someone was looking at us, and we looked over, and a guy was staring into the window. We ran up the stairs in a panic. We thought maybe it was her brother, but he wouldn't have came to the window and spied on us, and the face seemed too dark to be his. But we had the lights on in the downstairs, and there were no lights by that window outside, so it was hard to tell who it was. We didn't wake my parents up just in case it was her brother. We waited 30 minutes and went back down to grab our stuff. I went to sleep in my bedroom for the night. The next day we talked to her brother, and it wasn't him. That night, Brewster was back to barking again. 2 more months had gone by, and I had gone to bed and heard Brewster bark, and I looked out my window, and as usual, didn't see anything. I had just dozed back off when I woke up to Brewster barking frantically. I look out my window, and I see a guy running out of our driveway. I thought about waking my parents, but we had a trail on the side of our house that kids used to get to the road behind us. The neighborhood was on the side of a mountain, so all the kids used trails to go straight through to another road, instead of using the main roads. I had never seen someone come out of the other part of the driveway, because the trail was on the south side of the house, along with the Crawlspace and Brewster's area. My room was the only room on the north side. I decided to go back to sleep, and was tossing and turning. 15 minutes go by, and I smell smoke. I go to the hall, and the smell was a lot stronger, and it's starting to get hazy in Travis's room, which was directly across from mine. I scream, "Fire! Fire! Wake up!" My parents are up, and Travis doesn't want to get out of bed, but thank God for the strength of adrenaline. We get outside, and the flames were pouring out from the crawl space. We get Brewster out of his enclosure, and the neighbors all come out to help us. The firemen were rather quick, but the fire had destroyed the crawl space and my parents' and Travis's bedrooms because they were directly over the crawl space. The firemen got the fire out, thankfully, and nobody was physically hurt. This was one of the scariest nights of my life, though. I will always remember the fire chief kneeling down to speak to me after he had talked to my parents, and he said, "Melinda, we believe it was arson." I looked at him with tears streaming down my face, and I say in anger, "Who is arson?" Everyone started laughing so hard, and I'm thinking how this is funny. That damn arson could have killed my family. So he explained what arson was. I'm still friends with the old fire chief's son, and I shared that story with him often because his father passed away from cancer when we were teens. His father is the only happy memory I have from that horrific night. The island I grew up on had a city and a village out south. We lived south, but before the village. We had firemen for out south, north, and the city. We had state troopers for the island and city cops in the city limits. My mom took my brother and I to our family friend's house, and my dad dealt with the fire officials, and state troopers showed up later. After the investigation, my family, neighbors, and firemen pieced together that a person had been living in our crawl space for at least 4 months. We know he set the house on fire on purpose. He used a box of matches. My mom said the first odd thing she noticed that night was the smell of sulfur. We also know who did it. It was Mark. His uncle was one of the firemen who first showed up at our house and saw him standing near our driveway watching. My mom told him my description of what the person was wearing that I saw fleeing from our house, and it was what he was wearing. Behind our house near the crawl space area, my dad found where he hung out when he wasn't in the crawl space. There were a bunch of cigarette butts, cans of soda which were also found in the crawl space. But because our crawl space wasn't locked, our insurance company wouldn't have paid for the repairs. Because of our water tanks, the space was supposed to be locked, so my parents never said anything to the police, and the firemen never said anything. By pursuing this, we could have not had a home, a house my father had built. It took 4 months for our house to be repaired, and it smelled like ozone even years later. What bothers me the most is knowing he had seen me and my friends undressed numerous times while changing in the rec room during tons of sleepovers. Where he had set up shop was right next to the plywood with the holes drilled through. He listened to all of our secrets. I never explained to my friends that he had seen us and heard us during our sleepovers, because I didn't want them to feel sick to their stomachs like I did and still do. I bought a house a few months ago for my fiance and I to move into. Everything's been great so far, but some things have been happening over the past week or so that I was hoping I could get some opinions on. It's on a few acres out in the country, but not super isolated. We have maybe half a dozen neighbors within a mile radius, and it's only about 8 or 10 miles to the nearest town. It's an older house, but it was renovated recently. I don't know exactly how old the house is, but one of the garages has 1938 written in the concrete floor. We adopted a stray a little before Christmas, and later discovered that she was pregnant, and had puppies a little over a week ago. Since she had the puppies, she's taken to barking at nothing every once in a while, which didn't think was unusual. It's a very windy area, and I figured she was being overprotective and barking at the sound of the wind chimes, or the wind knocking over our outside trash can, or a curious possum, or any one of the dozens of things that make up living in the country. She's also starting to kind of dig at carpet in places, which I just chalked up to natural nesting instincts. Now, I'm not so sure. About a week or so ago, my fiance and I went to bed a little late and started hearing a loud scratching sound. It sounded like it was coming from the bedroom closet, but when I went to check it, it became apparent that it was coming either from inside the wall or from in the crawl space under the house. The sound was really freaking her out, so despite being tired and grumpy that it was 4 a.m. and I was still conscious, I put on some clothes and went to investigate. The crawl space is only accessible from outside, and there are only a couple of places where I can fit through to gain entry. These entries are currently covered up with plywood boards. I picked the entrance closest to where we heard the sound and stuck my head in. I shone my flashlight around, but didn't see anything, except for an old planting pot. So I set up a couple of the old, nasty, inhumane mouse traps and put the plywood back up. My fiance felt a little better after I checked it out, and we were able to get some sleep despite a little bit of continued scratching. A couple of days later, we hadn't heard any more scratching, so I decided to check the traps. This is when it started getting strange. Both traps were set off, but they hadn't caught anything and they were still baited. Then, I noticed something sticking out from under the planting pot. It was a torn piece of paper with some writing on it. I wrote it off as being something left behind by a previous owner, until I went to pay some bills last night. The note is written on the back of an envelope, and it looks just like one of ours. Anyone got any ideas what the writing might mean? I mean, it's a weird coincidence, right? I couldn't really keep an eye on this earlier, as I work late and didn't want to check in front of the sew. I'd rather not freak her out with this unless it becomes necessary. The note read, "If you live above, I stay below. If I cannot stay, then you must go. I be quiet." The last line creeps me out the most. To think I was actually feeling better that we hadn't heard any more scratching. I have a phobia that goes by a few names. Scopophobia, oplophobia, basically the fear of being watched. I have this weird compulsion. Whenever I see a doorway, a window, or virtually any surface that I believe someone could hide behind, I imagine a face peering out at me, staring. I imagine what I would do. What could I do? You will soon find out why I have this phobia. On to the story. I will try my best to remember all the details, but my mind has repressed a lot of it. Around June of 2016, my mother and I were living in a small apartment. There was no basement or attic, obviously, but there was one tiny crawl space in the closet floor of my bedroom. I never looked in it. I suppose some people would be overwhelmed with curiosity, but my mind had already imagined all the worst scenarios. I decided to leave whatever dead bodies and ghosts were down there for whoever rented after us. It was a nice apartment, small, but perfect for the two of us. We lived there for a few peaceful months, until the noises started. It was nothing extreme, just the odd bump in the night, and particularly scratching. My mom brushed it off as rats in the walls. As long as they stayed in there, I saw no reason to get rid of them. A week or two later, I had already grown used to the noises. It became almost comforting in a way. After all, I never really liked silence. That is, until I awoke one night to a different noise. A rolling sound. Eerily similar to the sound of my closet made when I opened it. I peeked my eyes open and looked over, but I couldn't make out anything in the dark. I thought maybe I saw something move, but I was well aware of how the mind plays tricks on you in the dark. There was only one way to find out. I turned on my lamp. I feel like crying just writing this out. It's been almost a year since I've had to recall this night. When I turned on the light, I expected to just see a closet full of coats, but what I saw was much worse. Much, much worse. It was an eye. Not just an eye, but the entire half of someone's face, barely visible in the tiny crack he had opened. He didn't even react to being caught. No smile, no fear, just watching. My heart has never beat faster than that night. I wish I screamed, or maced him, or anything, but I just stared back, frozen in time until I couldn't hold it in anymore. I began sobbing loudly. I think I tried to say something about the lines of, "What do you want?" but it was garbled by crying. He opened the door more. I could now see his entire body, which I don't care to describe, as I've spent 2 long years trying to forget his face. Shh. I lost my breath at that. Hearing him made it real. I couldn't pretend this was some fucked up hallucination anymore. At this, I sat up and pressed my back against the wall. "It's okay," he said it so cheerfully. It gives me chills just remembering it. This is when I finally had the courage to run out of the room. This creep knew my name. My fucking name. My mom, still half asleep while she called the police, thought I had imagined it. Of course, by the time the police got there, he was already long gone. All that was left of him was that damned crawlspace. I still never looked inside. Though, writing this now, I kinda wish I did. Having some sort of proof of this, I don't know, comfort me? Because at least you all would know I'm not crazy. Apparently, he had been living in there. For how long? I don't know. But the officers who first arrived on the scene said that there were tally marks inside the crawl space. I didn't want to know how many. I didn't want to know whether he was marking days or weeks. I just wanted to leave that fucking apartment. And we did. The police never found him. Not for certain. They thought they found a homeless man who matched his description, but he was apparently unresponsive. I've always thought they didn't take it all that seriously. They just thought he was a squatter, even after I told them that he knew my name. They thought that given how long he had seemingly been squatting, he had probably just heard my name through the floorboards. Since that night, he has been the face I always see when there's an open door or closet. It's grown more distorted as time goes on, but I can always make out a part of his pursed lips, as if he's still shushing me, even now. It's gotten easier with time, but I don't think it will ever leave me completely.